What does it take to create a vibrant, thriving life? First, the sad news is that Thoreau was right. Most people are leading quiet lives of desperation, lacking in meaning, fulfillment, and vitality. But we choose more. We choose to create extraordinary lives. And the Art of Vibrant Living show entertains you with inspiration, empowerment, and education to create your life into a masterpiece. It's time. Let's vibe up. Aloha, y'all. Daniel Aaron here. I am your host, and this is the Art of Vibrant Living show. Thank you for being with us. Awesome, amazing show we got. It's going to be very applicable to you. I guarantee it if you're a human. And, well, let's just jump right into it. We have an amazing guest today. Brandon Allen has worked with leaders to help them organize work, life, and transform their relationships by helping them see and do what they didn't think was possible. See what they can't see and do what they didn't think was possible. He's the founder of the New Work Revolution and works with leaders of all kinds to create a path for simple, effective leadership. And when he's not coaching or training, Brandon is hanging out with his wife and daughters. They live in Salt Lake City. And if we get him to describe himself, he would say he's funny, charming, interesting, and handsome, all of which claims are likely questionable, except the first. Brandon's into sports, running, music, hanging out with family, and reading when he's not busy helping others capitalize on their potential. Excited that you are here with us, Brandon. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, and I have the pleasure of being slightly ahead of our audience and knowing you a little bit already. But for those who don't, would you fill us in a little bit on how you got here?
Yeah, I mean, how far back do you want me to go? You want me to go a few years back here?
Yeah, well, just, I think the important thing is, well, okay, I'll put it this way. My perspective, I'm also a big fan of leadership. I wrote a book on leadership. I've studied leadership, taught leadership, and there's still, I think, a lot of misunderstanding about what creates leadership and where it starts. And I think your early experience as a leader is really pertinent for a lot of people, whether they're in overt leadership roles or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always, tried to be a leader. I think even from an early age. I mean, I've always tried to be someone that, with sports teams, things like that, did try to lift people up. And, getting a degree in business, you hear a lot about management, you hear a lot about leadership, and you think that, at that age, in your 20s, like, oh yeah, I know leadership. Like I've got this, like, yeah, I can do this. And, I got my first leadership assignment when I was about 24, 25 years old. And like a lot of people that age, I just thought, man, I know a lot about this. I'm really good at it. I'm pretty smart. And I always think about this when I got into it, because there's a quote from Mike Tyson that said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And that situation of being in a management leadership position for the first time, I totally thought of that, because I loved Mike Tyson in the 80s. I mean, he was one of my favorite boxers to watch. And so I thought about that, and I thought, this isn't going very well. My first leadership management assignment's not going well. In fact, it was going so poorly, I was really stressed out, but really I thought, I'm going to get fired. Like, I am going to get fired. This isn't going to work. And when my boss asked me what I thought the problem was, I did probably the least leadership thing that you could do in that scenario. I said, well, my team sucks. They're not good. If my team was better, I would totally be a better leader, because I would have the ingredients. I'm like, I need some Michael Jordans and some different people on my team. And so my boss, kind of being funny, he wasn't threatening me, but he said, hey, Brandon, when when the team doesn't do well, what do you think? What do you think the problem is, or what do they do about that? And what I realized is, he was talking about, well, they fire the coach, and I'm like, okay, I don't know that I want to get fired, and so he invited me to do a coach training, and that was really kind of what set me on this leadership journey, because it really changed the way that I thought about leadership, the way I thought about myself. And it really started to put me squarely in a position of being clear about what kind of leader do I want to be. So, I mean, that's kind of how I got here.
Hmm. Awesome. Thank you. And amazing that you brought up that Mike Tyson quotation, because literally in the moment you started speaking about those early experiences, that was the quotation that
Yeah.
flashed in my head.
Yeah.
And let me come back to one piece you said, because I think there's more worth unpacking with that, which is that your early experience was, you said something like, I know a lot, right? And I had the same experience early in my life, thinking, oh, well, mine was worse. I'm so smart and I know. And but what's the difference between, or I guess what's the handicap of knowing a lot, and what's the difference between knowing a lot and being effective as a leader?
Yeah. I mean, I think for many of us, we know a lot of things and we have access to a lot of things, but if we can take that knowledge and we can practice it and we can try it, but we can do it in a really half-hearted way. And I think all of us can think about times where we've seen someone do this, or maybe we've done it, where we have the intellectual head knowledge about something, but it's not really here in our heart. We don't really believe it. We don't embody it. And so I think when we're trying to do leadership, and really when we're trying to create any sort of movement at all, if you're not a believer, if you're not really sold out on that, if you don't really understand how you do the thing that you're talking about doing, it just comes across as really phony. And so for me, I had to take that information and take it from my head to my heart. And that really wasn't something that I was naturally good at. In fact, most of the time in my life, I had resisted getting my heart involved in anything that I really cared about. And so I tried to make it an intellectual exercise. But when you're dealing with people as an intellectual exercise is a great way to alienate people, to be aloof, to be dismissive, and to have people feeling generally like, yeah, I don't really know that I trust this person because they don't really seem that invested in me. And so that was a struggle that I had early on.
Yeah, once again, I can relate it. As you spoke that, I think it was John Maxwell said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, because I can relate. I'm sure a lot of the audience can relate. What you said, that wasn't something natural for you to involve your heart in the things that you cared about. What can you say more about that? What was it like? What does that mean for you then? And then how did you really shift it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take you guys back to my childhood, and without getting into a lot of details, I grew up in a scenario that was not ideal, where, some of your most trusting relationships in life let me down at an early age. And because of that, I adopted a mindset that, I wasn't going to let people hurt me in my future life. Like, that wasn't going to be me. So how I dealt with that is I held people out pretty significantly away from me so that they never got too close. And as soon as people started to get too close, I had a real knack for just evading their grasp and slipping away and not allowing them to get very close to me. And so, I already had that bent. So if anyone's familiar with the Enneagram, I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. I'm a challenger, but the biggest fear that we have is that people are going to let us down. And so that's the thing that I always fight, is that people are not my enemy. I can trust people, but I have to teach myself how to do that. I've got to lean into that discomfort of allowing someone the opportunity to let me down, to disappoint me, to break my heart. Like, I've got to find a way to do that. And unfortunately, one of the pieces of advice that I got when I first got promoted was, Brandon, let me give you a piece of advice. This was like a person who was about 2 or 3 levels up from my boss. And he said, don't be friends with your team. Don't get too personal. Don't get too friendly. And I thought, that's perfect. I'm like, I don't want to be friends with them. I don't want to be close to them. I barely want to know their names. Like, the less personal I could get with this, the better it would be. And so, and you would think that maybe I'm not friendly or all these, but I am. I'm very friendly, but I kept everything very surface level for people. We didn't have real conversations. We didn't really get into, depth in anything. And so when I led a team that way, there was a couple things that really bothered me. Number one, as I've grown older, I've realized, I do appreciate connection. I do enjoy connection. And I was actually surprised to learn in a coaching experience that I went through a few years back that people saw me as someone who valued connection, which I was like, oh, I didn't actually think that people actually knew that about me, because I sometimes can come across as a way that doesn't value that. And so that really felt inauthentic to me as a leader. And so I started to embrace connection more, and doing that, with my team really made a difference for them, because they really started to see me as someone who was invested in their career and really cared about them. And so, the practical parts of what that looks like is, number one, it's a lot of work on my part of determining, like, well, who do I want to be as a person of connection? Like, what does that look like to do that? And I think one of the biggest things that leaders really get fearful of is they say, well, Brandon, like, if I let people get close and if I let them get friendly at work, they're going to take advantage of me. They're going to take me for granted. I'm going to lose my authority as a leader. And this is the biggest example I give to kind of counter that thought process. And it has to do with child raising. So, I have 4 daughters, and there's an authority level that exists there between me and my kids, but it doesn't mean I don't care about them. So I would never, my kids would never come home from school and say they had a tough day. And I wouldn't look at them and say, well, what am I, your friend? Like, I don't want to hear about your problems. Like, go talk to one of your buddies about that. Like, I'm not your friend. I'm your dad. Like, we would never say that to our kids. And if you do, stop doing that. And, I would lean in, but I still have authority, but I'm caring, I'm demonstrating, I'm showing compassion and concern, all those types of things. Well, listen, when people are entrusted with someone as a leader, you're given a stewardship of that person's life as far as their career goes. And quite frankly, whether we like to admit it or not, part of their personal life is invested in this career as well. Their financial livelihood, their ability to have a home, eat, clothe themselves, clothe their family. Like, all those things are entrusted in me as a leader to help them grow and develop and be successful in a career so that they can provide all those things. So I'm a steward of that. And so when I got rid of this mindset of, well, being a boss means that you can't care or be friendly, then it really helped me. And the biggest way that we do that is through 2 things. Boundaries are important. What are your boundaries as a leader? Get clear on what those are. The second thing is this: agreements. Create agreements with people and be willing to uphold those agreements with people when those agreements are violated. If you can do those 2 things, it makes having that kind of a caring, nurturing relationship, even with people that work for you, it can make that possible if you lean into those concepts.
I love it. That's awesome. Okay, so 42 new questions come to me. So boundaries and
agreements.
Agreements. Yes, I'm with you on that. So, that's interesting. Boundaries and agreements. I will ask more about that. First, though, I want to, if you're willing, I'd love to know. I totally get the bad advice and why, given your past, seemed like great advice at first. Yeah. How did you come to realize that it was bad advice and you were, headed east looking for the sunset there?
Yeah. Well, simply put, Number one, I could feel a distance between me and the team that I led. That was the first thing. Now, the second thing is I decided if I'm going to really figure out what's going on, I need feedback. So I sat down with people individually on my team and I asked them for feedback. The very first person that I talked to was a woman who'd been with the company longer than I'd been alive. And I remember I asked her, I said, Joy, things aren't going well. You probably know that. I'm worried, I'm not really sure what the issue is, but what I'd like to do is sit down with you and have a candid conversation about what I can do better or what you think is the problem. Now, here's the thing about this, right? If you're going to do this, then you better be sincere, because I know leaders, sometimes they ask for feedback, they get it, they don't like it, and they punish people for it. Don't ever do that, because you'll never get people to be transparent and honest with you. Well, she looked me in the eye and she said this, right? Frightening. Do you really want to know? And I was like, oh man, I'm like, in that moment, I thought, well, maybe I don't, and I looked at her and I said, listen, just give it to me. And she said, we don't like you. And I was like, damn. I mean, it just like a punch to the gut. And I was like, oh, okay. And look, my face burned with a little heat. I'm not going to lie. I felt some shame. I felt some anger. I mean, just in that moment, it was pretty devastating to hear that, to be honest with you. And I kind of took a second. I took a couple of deep breaths and I looked her in the eye and I said, okay, tell me more. What specifically can I do to be a better leader for you and the other people on our team? And we had a 3-hour conversation that probably is one of the most impactful conversations that I've ever had in my entire life. Wow. And what's funny about that is people are like, oh, were you so mad at her? And I said, you know what? I asked, and I appreciated the fact that she was honest, because how many times as leaders do people give us lip service and they tell us what we want to hear? They don't want to hurt our feelings and they don't say those things. So when she said that, that allowed me to see some things about myself that I needed to do better. And so when I went to that coach training years ago, I was really in that space of looking for, how do I improve some of these things that have been pointed out to me that I am doing that is really creating a disconnect for my people. So that was a really pivotal moment for me.
Wow. Thank you. That's beautiful. Right. And let's highlight one, your courage to actually ask, which was probably quite uncomfortable at the time.
Yes.
And there's so much wisdom in that. And her courage and generosity. And I'm with you. Like I do everything I can to create environments of honest feedback. I've always done that in my work. And when I work with people, getting them to do that, so powerful. So good, what an amazing experience. And so it sounds like in some way that was I don't know, like almost like a channeling or something. It sounds like it was a little bit out of character for you in a sense. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I never wanted to know those things, so I just avoided those conversations altogether.
Right. Okay. Let's go first to, thank you for sharing that, by the way. I appreciate your honesty with us. And let's go to agreements before boundaries, because this is, to me, one of the most missed out on opportunities in all relationships. And I think so many of my conversations I have with clients, when they say, this is not going well and this hurts and this is a problem, it's like, it just comes straight to this. So will you tell us more about it? When you say agreements, what does that mean?
Yeah. So in 2007, I was hosting a radio show on a radio station called AM 630 K Talk here in Salt Lake. Not a very big station, and kind of a hodgepodge of different characters talking about various things. And so we had this radio show that we did. I brought this guy, Steve Chandler, onto the show. He was a guest on the show, and we used that as a platform to really bring on some pretty big thought leaders in the leadership coaching space to talk about what they were up to, what they were doing. And I remember Steve came on the show and he talked about this whole concept of agreements versus expectations. And I was just like, I mean, it's hard to host a show when you're like sitting there just wrapped up into like what the person is saying. And I'm like sitting there taking notes while he's talking. I'm in a radio booth. I've got all these controls. I'm supposed to be looking at like when the next commercial's coming up so I can, buffer out and buffer in. And I'm just sitting there like, oh my God, like this guy is like just dropping some knowledge on me. And it just made me think about how many times I had conflict that could have been avoided with an agreement. Now, let me tell you the difference between the two, right? Because that's important to understand that. An expectation, first of all, I think we're all familiar with this because this is the game that we typically play in. This is the plane that we typically come from. Is an expectation is something that resides inside of us. It's a desire, it's a wish, it's a want that stays inside of us. It doesn't get expressed. It doesn't come out to anyone or anything. It just stays inside. It's like, I hope my husband takes me to the new French restaurant downtown for our anniversary, and it's like, oh, surprise, we're going to Sizzler. And it's like, oh my God, this is not what I had in mind. Right. And so, it's an expectation, right? You didn't talk about that, but you expected, and we do this all the time at work, right? Well, shouldn't they just know that? I mean, I can't believe they would just do that. Like, how come they just did that? And so they have this expectation. And I think anytime when you're annoyed with someone, it's an opportunity to create an agreement. There's an agreement that needs to be had there that isn't currently existing. And now the difference between an expectation is an agreement is, again, an expectation is inside of us. An agreement is a want or a desire or a wish that is expressed outside of us in the form of a request. It's not a demand. It's, because again, we're talking about agreement. So you're not a dictator. You're expressing a request. Hey, I have a request about this situation. Hey, I have a request for how we communicate. And it's between two people. So agreements or expectations typically are with ourselves. Agreements are between two or more people where we agree and we create a container for how we want to operate with each other inside of that container. It's very powerful because now I've had people who have been upset with me in the past where I've taken it on and apologized and then realized that, you know what, I never made an agreement to do the thing that you're actually upset about. So I'm like, it helped empower me to not take on shame and guilt about things that people were upset about when they never actually made a request of me to do that in the first place. They just expected that that's what I was going to do or that's how I was going to show up. But the second thing is it allowed us to have common language about how each of us needs to receive and experience the other so that we're on the same page and we're clear about, how we want to operate together. So when I work with clients, and this came from an experience. I remember I was 1 minute late for a coaching call with a client. And this client was like, hey, you were late. And he was pretty upset with me. And I was like, and in my mind, on the Myers-Briggs, I'm a J, but I'm really close to the line. I'm like, I could be a P sometimes. I could be a J. Like, I'm not really black and white. I'm not like hardcore that way. And so, he's like, hey, you were a minute late. But in my mind, I was like, man, I'm pretty dang close. But he was really upset with me. And I realized in that moment, I need to have a better agreement with my clients on what I consider to be on time and seeing if people can agree to that. So the request I make to people now is that if you're within 5 minutes of our call time, I consider that to be on time. Like, I'm just going to tell you that now. If you're 5 minutes or earlier, I consider that to be on time. If you're more than 15 minutes late for a call, your call will be rescheduled at another time. I will not hold your call if you're more than 15 minutes late. We will cancel it. We will reschedule it to another time. So I had to get really clear about that, in like, how do I use time? How does that get expressed? Because I'm like, the one thing I don't want to work with is clients that are mad because I'm a minute late. That's going to happen from time to time. I don't want to have conflict about it. So let's agree to how I see it. And if someone can't agree to that, or if they're really like stuck on it, then I have to determine, do I want to work with this person or not? And I have that choice at that moment to say, yeah, you know what? I can do that. I can commit to that, or I'm not willing to commit to that. Let's part ways and just decide that this is not a good relationship for us. So that's kind of a crash course in agreements versus expectations.
Well, that's great. You spoke it well. I'm connected with Steve Chandler also. I have all of my clients listen to his audio track on expectation versus agreement. So let's go deeper then, because you were super clear with that, really helpful. Why, if you're up for it, why do people tend to avoid agreements or requests toward agreements?
Yeah. Well, I'll speak for me as one example that a lot of people I think will resonate with, and then we can kind of explore some other reasons. But the biggest thing is making an agreement is vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's easy to, like, for me, it's easy to have an expectation and not speak it, because if I speak it out loud and you reject it, now if I'm not in the right frame of mind, I'm going to feel rejected. I'm going to feel like, oh, well, they're not rejecting their agreement, they're rejecting me. So I'm going to avoid that uncomfortable space of creating an agreement. So I think that's number one. I think a lot of us, it feels really vulnerable. I think the second thing is this: we don't know what we want. So we're not clear on what are our boundaries, what are the things that we feel like we need in our world in order for our world to function at a level that works for us. So I think a lot of us are not clear about what that is. So to actually have an agreement means that I actually have to be clear on what my agreements, what I would like them to be. And I think for a lot of people, they don't understand that. And if you're a people pleaser, creating an agreement with someone and then having to hold them to that agreement, because here's the thing about standards, whether those standards be values, agreements, boundaries, or goals, or whatever, if you don't uphold the standard, then you don't have standards. So if you live in a world where you don't uphold your own standards, well, it's because you don't have any. And the only way to have standards is to stand for the things that you say that you stand for. So for a lot of people, if I'm a people pleaser, especially, or if I have conflict aversion, I'm not going to stand for someone who's breaking an agreement. I'm going to allow them to break it, which then creates the situation of now you've destroyed the agreement, because people now realize that your agreement doesn't really mean anything. There's no meat to it. So those are about three reasons that I think make it really hard for people to make agreements. And there's probably other ones that I'm not thinking of.
Well, you spoke it well, and I'm 100% with you on that. And that's probably the perfect transition to boundaries, right? So you brought that up as one of the two keys. What more would you love to share about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is just one of those things that I think as a leader, you just need to be really clear about. What are your non-negotiables? What are the things that you just absolutely will not tolerate? And so in leadership, I'm a big fan of being flexible, but I also don't want to be flexible in areas where it's just not appropriate to be flexible, or it really doesn't serve the team to be flexible. So I've got to understand what those non-negotiables are. And so many times, right, we have team members who say, hey, can I leave a little early today? Hey, can I leave a little early today? Or, hey, can I come in a little late today? And we continually say yes to that. And then pretty soon what happens? We get annoyed. We're like, damn, Jim always wants to leave early. So sick of him. And what's funny about it is Jim's going to keep asking because you keep saying yes. So you're mad at Jim. And this is one of those coaching moments where people, I think, a lot of times want to punch me in the face, but they're complaining about Jim. And I said, do you know what Jim's problem is? His leader. That's the problem. If you said no, Jim would get the message that it's not something that you're willing to entertain. But if you say yes, what do you expect Jim to think? He thinks you're fine with it. So it's disingenuous for you to come back to him with some disgust or disdain about him asking to get off early when you keep telling him he can. So I think it's really important for leaders to not agree to things that they know later they're going to be resentful about, they're going to be upset about. So have that boundary now and recognize, and I was like this early on in my leadership. I felt like I didn't want to be restrictive with people. Like I didn't want to put people, I didn't want to draw too hard of a line. But And the reason I did that is I thought, well, I want people to like me. I want
Mm.
people to think, oh, this guy's pretty cool. He's pretty laid back. And what I realized is that people hated me for it. They
Mm.
hated me. I never took a stand. So I let people get away with murder. I never had a hard line. When I started implementing boundaries and enforcing them, I realized people respected me a lot more. They're like, you know what, Brandon? I know where you stand. I appreciate that. And that works for me. And so I think boundaries can be really hard because sometimes it feels really mean to tell someone, hey, you got to tell your kid, hey, I'm not taking you to Walmart at midnight because you have a project due tomorrow, right? Like it feels hard to do that. But again, at some point we have to have a line that we draw with people to say, hey, these are my non-negotiables. These are the boundaries, so that people are clear about that. And I think people want to know what our boundaries are. And for the most part, they'll respect those. Now, we're all human beings in the human condition. So I never met a boundary as an 8 that I didn't like to step over just to see how serious someone was about that boundary. But, it's still important for us to know where those lines are.
Beautifully said. I'm with you. And in both cases, when you're speaking about boundaries or the vulnerability of asking for agreements, making requests, it's really about, or a big part of it is about, can I brave being uncomfortable for a moment, right? Can I
Yeah.
risk a little bit of fear or pain? And if we do that, right, then there's multiple payoffs in both those cases.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, Brandon, time is flying along here. And speaking of time, when we're recording this video at the moment, as we're speaking, we are in February, toward the end of February, 2025. And what does this point in the year mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot because this is the time of year where, in the calendar year is just, I think there's just natural kind of times where we can think about change, we can think about transformation. And, I think some people get cynical about that, like, well, who cares? It's just a new year. But, I think, look, for people, I think we kind of celebrate milestones, we celebrate turning the calendar. And so this is a time where people start thinking about or have thought about already, who do I want to be that's different than who I was the year before? But this is also the time of year, now that we're towards the end of February, where the wheels have completely come off, probably plans that people have. And so, what I think about a lot is, how to really think about, what we do from here. What do we do to create some sustainability with the change and transformation that we want to make? And so, that's the thing that I think about most this time of year.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so then that begs the question you asked, how do we do that? Right. And I'm with you. It's calendar years. In a way, it's arbitrary, right? This is a Gregorian tradition. For me, I just infuse it with meaning, though. And I have great rituals every year at the beginning of the year, and then it's easy to by February feel like we got punched in the face, and where's our plan?
Yep.
Right. So how do you work with that? How do you help people with that?
Yeah, absolutely. The first distinction that I like to make with goals is almost seems like a counterintuitive distinction, but ever since I've had this distinction presented to me, it's really changed the way that I've thought about goals. And I think one of the things that when we start with goals, we think about the action of doing it, right? We think, oh, are my goals smart? Did I write them down? Did I share them with other people? And that's the mechanics of goal setting. But then there's the inner game of goal setting. And one of the things that goal setting can really bring about for people is a lot of shame and condemnation when you fail. And so this distinction was brought to my attention years ago in coaching work that I've done in how we look at goals. And I love this, right? Goals are a place to start from versus a place to arrive at. I mean, I love that distinction, right? So instead of thinking about goals as like, oh, I better hit them and I better do it, if I don't, then I'm a failure. It's like, hey, goals and setting goals is an opportunity to start a journey in a direction that we're not 100% sure we know where it's going to go because it was an arbitrary destination to begin with. And I'll give you an example of this. I had a leader that I coached that wanted to do a specific amount of revenue for a given month in their company. And they were like, oh, this is going to be a record by far. It's going to blow it out of the water. Well, they didn't hit it, but they still set their all-time record for revenue in a month. And when I got on the call with him, I actually thought that he would be pretty excited about what they had just accomplished. And the leader was actually pissed that they didn't hit the goal that they set. And when I said, well, how do you want to handle that? He said, well, I'm going to give it to my team in our meeting this week. I'm going to really lay into them about it. And so, as a coach, I just want to help people. Like, I want to hold up the mirror and let someone look at it and just determine what they see. And so I held up the mirror by saying this. I said, so you want to celebrate the best month you've ever had in your company by yelling at your team. I just want to make sure I'm clear about that. I just want to make sure like we're on the same page. Maybe I misheard it. And I remember he kind of chuckled and he paused and he's like, God, that sounds so stupid, doesn't it? And I'm like, hey, you said it, I didn't. But the problem is like, he's not looking at goals as a place to start from. He's looking at the destination. And now because he didn't hit the destination, he's like, it's a failure. But it's like, look, even in goals that we don't hit, it's an opportunity to learn about why didn't we hit it? And when we did hit it, we can even ask our question of why did we hit it? So it's an opportunity to learn either way, but we get so hung up on, if I set this goal, by God, I better hit it and I better see it through to the end. But I don't know about you, but I've had years where I've set a goal that I thought for sure was so important, started working on it for a couple months and then realized this is not the right goal. This is not the right thing to be doing right now. I need to scrap it. And we're free to do that. We're free to take something and just say, and make that decision right here and now. This is not the right goal for me. I'm going to replace it with something that I think fits better with what I'm doing right now. So, that's the first thing with that. And then the second thing is this, in goal setting, no matter what you do, no matter what you want to do, no matter what you've created as a destination for yourself, in your mind, you may feel like, I really want this thing. I'm so excited about it. I can't wait to do it. But there's always a competing commitment to everything that you want to accomplish. So when you want to move forward with something, let's say you want to spend more time with your kids. Let's say that's a goal that you have. There's a competing commitment that you might have there. That competing commitment might be, I'll use myself as an example. I don't necessarily think this way, but I've heard dads talk like this. I have 4 daughters. So I might say, well, I don't want to spend more time with my daughters. They're teenagers. They don't want to spend time with their dad. So the competing commitment is the fear of rejection, that I won't be good enough for them. I won't be interesting enough. I won't be whatever enough. And so then I won't hang out with them. Or maybe you want to eat healthier. Well, the competing commitment there is, man, eating healthy kind of sucks, doesn't it? It's like Joe brings donuts to the break room and I'm not supposed to eat that stuff. Like, come on. It's just, the thing about eating healthy is just no fun, right? So over here, I'm like, boy, I really want to eat healthier. I think I'd feel better. I think I'd add some years to my life. But over here, you're like, oh, eating healthy, man, it's crappy. Remember when so-and-so was on that diet? Wow, they looked like they were going to die every day I saw them. And, it looked terrible. So, we always have these competing commitments. And the thing about it is, if you're not aware of what your competing commitments are, then you're definitely going to fail. Because if you're not aware of what those competing commitments are and you haven't worked through how you want to deal with those competing commitments will sabotage your success. And you'll be able to justify it with whatever story you've been telling yourself for your entire life. So when it comes to goals, right? One, it's a place to start from versus a place to arrive at. It's about the journey, enjoy it, appreciate it, learn from it. The second thing is every goal that you have has a competing commitment, something that really wants to derail you. Stephen Pressfield wrote a book called The War of Art. It's a great book, not The Art of War by Sun Tzu, but The War of Art. And this is all about the resistance. And everything that we want to do that's good, there is resistance to that thing. So we've got to pay attention to that.
Beautifully said, super clear. And yeah, for anybody that hasn't read Pressfield's book or multiples of his books, so good. Hugely valuable. Awesome. Okay. Well, and then, oh goodness, time's flying. One more question then on goals, which is, I hear a lot of what you're saying, Brandon, and I think along very similar lines. I often use a bit different language. Part of what I think I hear you saying is the goal isn't necessarily the greatest benefit, like achieving
Right.
the goal or getting
Yeah.
that finish line or the thing.
Yeah.
What would you say? What is the greatest benefit or purpose of setting the goals?
Yeah. I mean, really, goals are for growth.
Hmm.
So if we don't embark in change, right, then we're going to just keep doing the same thing that we've always been doing because we know how to do that. We're familiar with it. Even if some of what we already are doing right now is crappy, our brain knows it. It's fine with it. We've already figured out the workarounds, right? We've already MacGyvered whatever we need to do in our head to work around whatever unpleasantness that currently exists. And so it's about growth, right? So if you look at goals about, well, why do I want to set goals? Is it so I can tell people like I hit my goals and I'm a goal achiever? Like, okay, that's fine. But really, the purpose of a goal for me, and look, I'm not going to tell you what your purpose for goals should be. Actually, one of the things that I tell people when I talk about goals is if you don't want to set goals, then don't. There's nothing bad that's going to happen to you if you don't set a goal. It's really a personal preference, right? What works for you? What's part of your game that allows you to be successful? So for me, I think if we're going to set, goals, then I have to identify, well, what's the purpose for doing it? Well, the purpose is I want to learn, I want to grow, and I want to improve. Okay, great. Now let's come from that space. So achievement, if we can do it, is amazing. I love to hit goals, but if I don't, I'm not going to be downstairs eating a pint of ice cream, watching, whatever TV show makes me feel good, while I'm crying into my ice cream because I'm just upset with the failure of a person that I am. And I think a lot of people are afraid of goals because of that.
Yep. Well said. Beautiful. All right. Well, so then is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to bring forward?
Oh my gosh, we covered so many things really, and just the things that we talked about conceptually. I'll tell you one last thing about this really quick.
Sure.
When I talked about the being over the doing, one of the things that I think is so important. In fact, I've shared this with Daniel so that he can share this with you, is to create a leadership philosophy, to identify who am I as a leader, because you can see 10 different leaders who are successful, who lead in sometimes drastically different and sometimes slightly different ways. So the best way to lead is to be a leader that plays to your strengths while also playing away from your weaknesses. So don't be afraid to really identify what it is that I do well, what it is that I don't do so well, and play to your strengths, play away from your weaknesses, and get clear on what does it mean for me to be a leader? What does it mean for me to lead? Who am I when I'm at my best as a leader? Take some time and really define that for yourself.
Beautiful. Yeah, 100% with you. Yeah, everybody's unique, and including, and you gave great examples early of having studied the Enneagram yourself, looking at the Myers-Briggs. There's so many different tools for understanding who we are
It
and what our
really is.
strengths are, and then being able to understand other people's, complementary or, different areas where we connect. So awesome. We're going to wrap up soon here. I got a big question for you. Prior to that, though, I believe that you have a gift for our audience. Is that true, Brandon?
Yeah, I do. So I have a workbook and a 3-hour training that I did last fall on creating your leadership philosophy, what I just talked about. So I've given Daniel a link that you can go check that out and review that and go through it. And that will help you kind of create that rough draft of your own leadership philosophy and hopefully help you get a little bit clearer on, who you are as a leader and how you lead best.
Okay, Perfect. Beautiful. That's an awesome gift. So I have placed that into the live stream comments. So if you're with us live, you can get it there.
Yeah.
If you're watching on social media by rebroadcast, you'll see it there. I will also put it up when we post the show, and make sure it's in the notes so that people can get it whichever avenue they're tuned into. Awesome. Thank you for that. So I got a big question. Can I ask you the big question?
Let's hear it.
You are clearly a man who has learned a lot, including how to access his heart and how to care about people, not just the information. So if it's a big question, because I'm asking you to hone that down. If you had one thing that you could share with our audience to help them live their most vibrant, thriving life, what would that one thing be?
So I'm going to borrow this. This is not my own thought, but this is from Albert Camus. It's probably my favorite thought. It is that in an unfree world, the best way to live in an unfree world is to live so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. So anything that you can do to get clearer on who you are in your game so that you can live free of other people's constraints, other people's ideas about who you should be, so that you can live authentically who you are, just takes a lot of pressure off of you feeling like you have to perform for other people's expectations.
Hallelujah. Beautifully said. I love that. I often say that my own mission is to help all of us have more freedom, love, and vibrancy. And the love and the vibrancy, they come as a consequence of freedom. Without that, there's no real love. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for bringing that forward.
Yeah.
And Brandon, thank you for being with us. Not only for taking this time, but clearly you've done a lot of work on yourself and you're adding a lot of good to the world. So I really appreciate all that you're doing in the world and for being with us. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Daniel. Thanks for having me on.
Total pleasure. And y'all in the audience, thank you, because we're here for you. And the fact that you are interested in and doing something about more growth, thriving, creating vibrancy in your life. And in fact, please do grab the gift that Brandon offered you. Take on one of the gold nuggets that he dropped and apply it in your life. Try it out. Implementation is for sure where the rubber meets the road. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you. I love you. We will see you again soon. Aloha. Mahalo for tuning in to the Art of Vibrant Living show, y'all. I'm Daniel Aaron, and may you live with great vibrancy.